Hello, this is Niswander of the Nowman Show, and continuing the conversation with producer-director Denny Tedesco. Denny, your father, of course, was the renowned session musician Tommy Tedesco, played on thousands of records. And in the film, there's a quote that I thought was outstanding. I'd like to get your response to that. I studied common sense more than I did guitar.
Basically, he said that at a seminar at actually a Musicians Institute. And what he was, and what he was telling the kids is said, you could be the greatest guitar player, you could be the brilliant, but it doesn't mean you're going to keep going, because you got to watch what you're doing. You got to have common sense of when to play, what to play, when to say something, when not to say something. There's so much involved. He could read a room like no one. I mean, he could walk in and just know what the vibe was, when to be cool, or he could, work a session really well. And he said, "Listen, I play for smiles." And what he meant was, I'm getting paid. You give me a piece of music. You want me to do something, I will play it. If I change it up because I think it'll be better this way, if he's not smiling, I got to go back to a different way. Until he smiles, I keep playing, because you're there. You got to, you just got to be there and do whatever that guy wants. Because don't forget, he might think creatively it's not right what that guy's given me to do, but you know what? He's paying the bill. And it goes back to like Snuff Garrett. He knows, those producers, they know what they want. You just do what they want. That great story of, there's nothing to do with Lalo Schifrin, the great Lalo Schifrin. Says to the dad, he says, "Hey, Tommy, we need you to do some flamenco guitar." Okay. And if you know, he's brilliant on the Spanish guitar. He said, "All right, do you want this?" He plays his flying up and down the thing, of the fretboard. He says, "Or do you want the D Concenzo style?" He says, "What's the D Concenzo style?" And now Lalo's from Argentina, but well, the D Concenzo style is plays it and slaps, and he's slapping the, his body of the guitar. And the guy says, Lalo says, "Do the D Concenzo style." Okay. And then he tells the kids, he says, "D Concenzo is a bricklayer from Niagara Falls, New York." He says, "He doesn't play guitar, but he's an expert." Dad's an expert. He's got to know what he's talking about. Yeah.
So he's from Niagara Falls, New York. That's
right. Dad's from Niagara. But he was a BSer. Those guys could get. They would. I think they got a. Towards the end, it was like, what could we pull off? I mean, it was just, the things that they would do. And they would have fun.
Yes.
But their job was, even the worst of times, they still had fun.
And that's the beautiful thing about music, is that you're together with other people. I'm sure that the camaraderie must have just been absolutely amazing. And
even when he retired, and that was one of the things was why I made this film. At 62, he had a stroke.
Yeah.
And then he had the cancer a couple years later. But what killed me was at 62, before the stroke, he was playing better than he ever played.
Wow.
And it was driving me crazy. It didn't drive him crazy. He understood the business. He knows his time is come and gone. At that point in life, he's getting calls for the things that reading with John Williams or James Horner or gut string or mandolin, whatever, Godfather 3. And that's when he would be called. But he missed being around. I think that's what they all miss. But what drove me crazy is the creativity at that age was so much better than at 25.
Yes.
He had the chops. He had everything going for himself. And, and I think that was my frustration to maybe why I made the film.
And you wanted to create a time capsule to share with others as
no one
as
knew
something
about this.
Personal.
No one knew about these guys. And, the personal side of the story, which you'll find out in the film like you've seen, it was never going to be a personal side from my point of view. It was about these guys, and someone said, "Why are you doing it? Why are you cutting it like this?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You have an insight that none of us have as editors. You are not participating." And I did not want to be a part of this film. And you only see me at the beginning, not see me, you hear my voice.
Yeah.
And it was about the story of my father and his friends, the Wrecking Crew, the extended family. But it's really about this group.
And speaking of extended family, here's a great clip, and I don't think there can be a greater compliment than a fellow musician.
We're at Fox, recording the music for these 4 segments of MASH. And in one of the titles, he wrote something in the the ledger lines on the bass clef, which has always been somewhat of my weakness in reading ledger line notes. And I had rehearsals with Benny about it, and so I had problems with it, but I told him not to worry about it. During the rehearsal, we get to this one segment, this one title, and we're playing, and they get to this part that bothers me, and I sort of kind of flub it in a way. And Benny says, Chuck, you okay? I said, Benny, don't worry about it, it's okay. Blah, blah, blah. It's the first time that Tommy I worked with Tommy. So the red light goes on. I know that if there's a mistake made, they got to stop the film and they got to stop the recording and go back because we're still in tape in those days. So we start recording it, we get to this part, and I make a mistake. I flub it. I'm going, damn it. Tommy goes, now I knew who he was. Wow, I'm glad that somebody else made a mistake rather than me. Run it back. Oh, and they say, Tommy, you all right? Tommy said, somebody else had a problem with this. Run the tape back, start it again, we get to the same place and I make a mistake. And he turns to me and he says, that's the last time. Then I realized that he's doing me a favor. He's hearing me mess it up. And he did this twice and put it on him. So the third time we go back to play this, when we get to that part, it's only like a 1 bar or 2 bar phrase. I just don't play. Now I'm scared to death. So we finish the track, and of course before they excuse the orchestra, they check the music with the film. And so once we're finished, I'm just sitting there like this, and Tommy, he's sitting right next to me. He touches me like this, and he says, so well, obviously that means that if you can't do it, don't do it. We listened to him. When they played it back, Denny, I heard the bass. I didn't play it, but I heard the part. And so I'm sitting there going, and Benny's looking at me going, we go to the break room. And he says, man, I'm Tedesco, Tommy Tedesco. He says, you know, it's great to work with you. I heard a lot about you. He looked at me and he said, every bass clef instrument in this orchestra has that part. Every last one of them. So the first time that you missed it, the second time around, it's up to you to decide if you want to play it. Did your ego want to play it? He said, you didn't even have to play it. As it is, we heard the bass. And that way we didn't have tracks. At the most, it could have been 8 tracks, or 4 with the rhythm section. There's no way he's going to know that you didn't play it. You know, and he says, don't get scared. He says, fear does that. Thanks for saving me. He said, no problem at all, man, no problem at all. You know, you're a good player, you're here for a reason, because it's a first call band. He says, just don't be afraid of this. You know, and I remember I got in my car going back home. I said, what a nice gesture from a real nice guy to do that for me. You know, because I've seen other people really come down hard on other musicians, especially if they were new. But it's just so kind. So I tell that story with a lot of love.
Wow. What a great story.
Yeah, that was one of those stories I found out recently.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, that's just a few months ago. And what's amazing is his reputation is why we got this thing made, because he's so giving. There was only a couple people that helped him with break-in. Bob Bain was one of the great guitar players that helped him. But you know, he was a defender of musicians. I mean, there were many times musicians would say, you have no idea what your dad did for me. You know, he stuck up for me, and you know, and that's what I'm most proud of the film.
That's fantastic. And well, our time is out. It's been great. How can people learn more about you and the film and get to music and all of the above? You
could always go to wreckingcrewfilm.com. You could always, obviously, I have the DVD. We ended up branding everything but underwear. But if you want it, I can make it. We came out with the soundtrack on CD, and we came up with the LP. This wonderful book, though, with Sound Explosion, which is Ken Sharp, one of the great writers today.
Wow. It's a fantastic book, yeah.
And no, I'm really thrilled, and I think we're going to give the folks a discount from.
great.
We put up a code word that they can use, that only they can use to get that percentage.
That's fantastic.
But no, it's fabulous. I just want people to see and hear these stories and find other stories. Let them tell other stories. Everybody should find out the past.
That's right. Thank you so much, Denny. Denny Tedesco, and this is Niswander, and you've been watching The Nowman Show. Don Randi is a keyboard player. He's a band leader, composer, sideman, and author. He has performed on numerous recordings, unbelievable, as we'll get into, including the famous Wrecking Crew, also a diversity of artists such as the Beach Boys, Linda Ronstadt, Quincy Jones, Cannonball Adderley, Frank Sinatra, Frank Zappa, The Wall of Sound with Phil Spector, on and on and on. He's played live on stage with Nancy and Frank Sinatra. He's released his own jazz albums, fronted a band called Quest, and he owns the famous club, The Baked Potato, in Studio City, California, that was voted by Los Angeles Magazine as the best jazz club in 2010. He's the author of the book, You've Heard These Hands, From the Wall of Sound to the Wrecking Crew and Other Incredible Stories. Don Randi, thank you for being on the Nowman Show.
How can I say? It's a charmed life for me, being in the right spot at the right time.
Right, and you certainly were. Now, you've been credited, as this book indicates here, with what's called The Wrecking Crew. We've had Denny Tedesco on this show, the director of the great documentary that you're featured in, as well as being part of Phil Spector's Wall of Sound. Let's get into that. When did you first find yourself as a first-call musician?
Well, being in the right spot at the right time. He had a saxophone player that booked most of the musicians for him by the name of Steve Douglas. And Steve was a great blues player, but he wanted to play jazz. And when we started doing, he would come down and sit in with us all the time. And he graduated high school, Fairfax High School in Los Angeles, with Phil.
Yeah.
With
Phil Spector.
Phil Spector.
Yeah.
And Phil had already had a hit record as the Teddy Bears, To Know Him Is to Love Him.
Oh, that's right.
On Dory Records. So that was kind of, he says, Phil is getting ready to record again, and I didn't know Phil. He said Phil Spector, and then he explained, and he's just getting ready to do a number of artists, and he's starting his own label. So, would you like to play? I said, of course I would. Of course it was me, Al DeLore, Mike Rubini, or Mike Spencer, and there was 4 or 5 piano players because that was part of the Wall of Sound.
Yeah.
But I was one of them. And he and I hit it off immediately. Phil and I got along great, and we became very close friends. Steve Douglas, Phil Spector, myself, and the arranger, Jack Nitzsche, we did almost everything together, all the time.
So Jack Nitzsche was the arranger.
Was the arranger, right. Great. And his wife, Gracia, was part of the Blossoms.
Oh, wow.
Most people didn't know that. It was Jeannie King, Darlene Love, Fanita, I can't remember her last, Fanita James, I think, and Gracia Nitzsche. They were the Blossoms.
Wow.
And then Gracia eventually stopped doing it so much. And they were incredible vocalese. I mean, there was not, most of that stuff was not written. Phil would play at the piano and say, you sing this, you sing this, you sing this. And that's how the parts were arranged.
Wow.
And they had such incredible ears. But, wonderful songs.
Do you have any...
He's a Rebel.
Yeah.
That was the first one.
A kinship there.
And that was the Crystals,
Crystals, yes.
And then we did all the Ronettes, and Ronnie was just a delightful.
And you played piano on the Do Ron Ron and all that, and the Be My Baby.
What a lyric.
Yeah.
I met her on a Saturday, the Do Ron Ron.
Yeah, right.
The Do Ron Ron. The Do Ron. And that's a #1 record.
I know, right? I know. It's amazing. I mean, I'm going to read some of the names of the people you worked with.
Oh, sure.
And just so that you can hear them, a certain amount of the volume of your work here all at once. And the people watching also, you may not know how many different artists that Don has worked with. Here we go. Of course, Brian Wilson, Beach Boys, Fifth Dimension, The Association, Glenn Campbell, Harry Nilsson, Del Shannon, Wanda Jackson, Lee Hazelwood, Leonard Cohen, Lou Rawls, Elvis Presley, of course, Phil Spector, The Wall of Sound, Michael Nesmith, The Tubes, Frank and Nancy Sinatra, Neil Diamond, Rake and the Surftones, there's an interesting story, right? Turtles, Dwayne Eddy, Dean Martin, Rick Nelson, Gene Vincent, Rosemary Clooney, Waylon Jennings, Doris Day, Tim Buckley, Bette Midler, Michelle Phillips, James Brown, Stony Ponies, Linda Ronstadt, Gary Lewis and the Playboys, Leslie Gore, Sonny and Cher, David Axelrod, Jan and Dean, Everly Brothers, Righteous Brothers, Love, Cass Elliot, Monkees, Buffalo Springfield, Laura Nyro, Buck Owens, and Neil Young. That's just to name some of them. How does that make you feel when you hear that?
You left off Ray Peterson.
Ray Peterson, oh yeah.
Corina.
Corrine, yes, I'm sure there were many
Oh, yeah.
that aren't household names, but they were great.
It's mind-boggling, you know.
Yes.
We didn't look at, all of us that were working, we were supporting our families.
Yes.
We were working so hard, that was what we were there for, but we weren't home.
Yes.
For a period from 1962 almost to 1970, I remember talking with my wife, and we got into an argument, and she turned around, it was over our kids, something was going on with one of my sons. And she says, well, where the hell were you? And I had to shut up, you know, because she had the bulk of it, you know, and although I was making great money and doing a lot of work like that, but I wasn't home that much. Because for me, when I finished my day gigs, most of the time, it would run into the night, but I always worked in nightclubs.
Yes.
I worked just about every place on the Sunset Strip and La Cienega Boulevard.
Wow.
You know, in those days, I opened for one of my favorite artists of all time. His name was Slim Gaylord.
Slim Gaylord?
Gaylord, yeah. He wrote a song called Cement Mixer, Putty Putty, and a whole bunch of stuff. But he had an incredible style.
Yeah.
And he was famous for him and a bass player, Slim and Slam Stewart and Slim Gaylord. And he was like a mentor to me. I learned so much from just watching him bullshit an audience. Oh my God, he would take that audience and he'd leave his set with $300-400 in tips.
Oh, wow.
And my rhythm section, the drummer and bass player with me, would work with Slim.
Wow.
So he would share the tips with them. So they were making great money. I wasn't.
Oh, wow.
But he really was a great guide, you know, of how to handle an audience and how to recognize what they tend to want to hear. You know, so it was a good lesson learned.
Well,
and I worked
a good musician is also a good listener.
Oh yes.
Right.
He took Downbeat magazine one night and read it for 45 minutes. It was the funniest thing I've ever heard. No,
he was just reading articles.
He was just reading and then telling stories about Miles Davis, about Dizzy, about this one, because that was his era. You know? And I'm sitting there saying, oh my God. And we became good friends. And later on, of all things, he had to go to England to earn a living because there was no gigs in Los Angeles anymore. And guess what? The BBC recognized his talent and came back to the United States and did his special. And I got to be on it. You know, it was such a thrill. And him taking them all over and pointing out where this club used to be, this club used to be here. And he says, and talking about myself. And that always bothered me that the BBC had to do that when he was about as an American jazz player ever, and they didn't recognize it, you know. They do now.
Yes.
But not all the time. Most people, he was a little early for most of those guys because he was before Miles, he was before all that kind of more contemporary jazz.
Do you have any particular stories that you remember from the Wrecking Crew or the Wall of Sound sessions that stand out as highlights, memorable moments?
Yes, I have. There's a lot of them in my book,
There's a lot
incidentally.
of them in your book. By the way, the book is called You've Heard These Hands, From the Wall of Sound to the Wrecking Crew and Other Incredible Stories. And maybe a story or two that it's not in the book you could share with us?
Well, there's
or that is.
I think it's in the book, but we were doing a date for Phil. And Phil gets very intense, and you never do. We never went and did a date with Phil, and it was one take.
Yeah.
It was always 7, 8, 9 hours on the same song.
Yeah.
Till he got it right. And as we're playing, we hear this phone ringing, and and Phil says, "What the hell is going on? I hear this phone ringing." And we stop, and then you wouldn't hear it. And we continue a little bit. Now we're getting a little more intense. It's the third hour, fourth hour. The phone was ringing again. And we can't figure out, where is this phone ringing? And we're looking around. There's no phone in the studio. And now it's starting to bother him because he knows he's getting close to start making takes. And what had happened was Hal Blaine had been working at Paramount the day before and asked one of the sound guys to borrow a prop telephone.
Oh, wow.
And he had a prop telephone in his drum case next to his drums.
Oh, wow.
And he lifted the head off, the top of the drum case off just enough, and he'd hit the button and it would start ringing. And finally, after about the 5th hour, Phil was screaming, "What the hell is going on?" And he let it ring and ring and ring and ring, and finally we were all looking around, and he pulls the case and picks up the phone. "Yeah, just a second. Phil, it's for you." And of course, the whole place cracked. This was at Gold Star. We were in hysterics because we didn't know where it was coming from. And Phil just had to sit there, you know. That's how we eventually got the name The Wrecking Crew, because we could wreck a date like that.
Oh, wow, yeah. And he was such a perfectionist, probably,
Sure,
right? And
sure.
so, which would mean that he could be the blunt of the joke.
Yeah, and he really knew what he wanted. He was amazing with guitar players, especially.
Yeah.
He would tell one guitar player, "I want you to play it on this fret. Can you put a capo on because I want the open sound out of your guitar?" And he'd go down 3 or 4 guitar players, and some of the greatest. I remember one date I looked over and there was Howard Roberts, Barney Kessel, Tommy Tedesco, and a young kid by the name of Russ Titleman, who was went to Fairfax High School and was his runner, but he was also a rhythm guitar player. And Russ became one of the biggest producers of all time.
That's right,
you know?
that's right.
Russ was watching and listening and learning every time he was in it. And a sweetheart. What a great guy. Good man.
So at most, how many piano players were there on the Wall of Sound?
3 and 4.
Just 3 and 4 usually?
Yes, you know.
When did Leon Russell come into it?
About a year later, you know, when he came to town. Leon would sub for me at my nightclub gig at Sherry's.
Oh, really?
Playing bebop, playing jazz.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
And most people didn't know that he could do that. Yeah. I knew that.
Yeah.
And I used to say, "Yeah, you're not going to sub for me too many times," you know.
Yeah, exactly.
He was a great player.
And well, coming from the South, you know, he had his own distinct style too. I mean,
Well, I think he was from Oklahoma.
Yes, Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Is that South?
Well, that'd be Southwest. I've lived in
Okay,
that area,
yeah.
so yeah, it's considered
Yes,
Southwest, but yeah.
Yeah, and him and David Gates too is another one from that same area.
That's right. He's from Tulsa as well,
sure.
And a lot of talented people.
Sure.
With the guy that wrote After Midnight, J.J. Cale. He's
Sure.
from that area
That's
as
right.
well.
That's right.
Yeah. So now you're talking about Hal Blaine.
Yes.
Obviously, you guys are very close, just like you were with Tommy Tedesco,
Sure.
guitar player. Now, and when the studio gigs kind of dried up, some people started becoming teachers, and some went on the road. Were you one of those guys that went on the road when the studio gigs were?
No, the only time I went on the road was with Nancy Sinatra.
With Nancy Sinatra.
And in the beginning, Hal and I would go out, and we were paid extraordinarily well.
Yeah.
And you know, and Nancy is the best. Nobody will ever come near how gracious she is to musicians. But not only that, she's kind to everybody. She's got a wonderful, wonderful heart. It can't be matched. And I've worked for a lot of great people, but it's something special with her. And it was always, "Is everything okay?"
Yeah.
And we traveled all over the world. At a certain point, Hal didn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
So Billy Strange, who was her conductor, he kind of bowed out. So she asked me if I would do it, and my deal was only if she used my band, which was always a dynamite band.
Wow,
So
wow.
my band got to go on the road with her,
Yeah.
so to speak. The Quest band would go out with Nancy.
That's fantastic. So I know we've got a lot we want to cover. We're running out of time, but briefly explain some of the jazz bands that you are. Let's talk about your current work right now and what you're doing with.
Well,
with
right
music.
now we're doing an album based on all Beach Boys songs, and
Fantastic.
it's a jazz album. And we're having so much fun doing it because it's easy to play, but the songs, some of them, when you put them in a different vein, Little Surfer Girl as a very slow ballad
Wow.
is just gorgeous. I mean, it just came out, you know. We're having so much fun doing it. We're almost finished with it. And we just finished a Christmas album for a guy in Iceland. His name is Geir Olafsson.
Wow.
And he's got a great 22-piece band that he works with up there all the
Excellent.
time. So we go back and forth, and we'll go up there with my band and do concerts with him.
Wow. So Quest goes up there.
Yeah, Quest, the whole band goes, and that's a lot of fun.
Wow.
And for me, I never stopped recording. A lot of the guys did. I mean, I will still get calls. Unfortunately, there's somebody. I figured I went in to do something for a young producer, and he asked me to play this lick that I played on I forget, 50 years ago at least.
Yeah.
And it was H.B. Barnum that was the arranger
Yeah,
on that,
yeah.
you know. I think it was a Little Star.
Yeah.
What was the group, Little. And I didn't know what the hell he was talking about, but he was smart. He had a 45 player, and he put the record on and had it there for me to listen to.
Wow.
He says, "Here, do you remember?" And I said, "Yes, thank you very much." And it was the same 8th note, 16th note style that I would play on most of Phil Spector's records.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But that he wanted that sound, but he didn't know how to say exactly what it is because he's not a musician.
Right, right.
But he heard what he wanted.
Yes, yes.
And he was smart enough to have the record there, which I was glad to do for him.
And you didn't have to be a musician to know what sounds good to you, like Snuff Garrett, you know.
Yeah, sure. Well, you know, I so many of the dates I did,
Yeah.
you have to remember that very few of them, even if they wrote the part out, someone would say, "I don't like what I wrote.
Yeah.
Can you make something up?"
Yes, yes.
And most of the time it was chord sheets. When I did the Linda Ronstadt solo on Sound of a Different Drum, it said Baroque style.
Is that what it said on the chart?
On the chart, Baroque style. I think
Really?
Jimmy Bond was
Wow.
the arranger.
Wow.
And he and I worked together all the time. He knew that I knew what he was talking about. They had this beautiful harpsichord, and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
did it, you know.
It's a beautiful song, too.
You know, great Mike Ness's song, you know.
And you had a lot to do with pulling together Cracklin' Rose, too,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
With Neil Diamond in the studio.
That was so lucky for me.
I loved that song when I was a kid.
Oh.
There's something about it. I love melody. and it
We
just-
did. That's a good story.
Yeah.
Hal and I were brought back into overdub.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there after we did our parts, and I think Tommy Catalano was the producer. And as Hal's walking past me, we're at Sound Recording, Armin Steiner's place in Hollywood. And I said, "Boy, do I know what to do with this song." And that's all I said, and I'm sitting doodling at the piano.
Yeah.
And Hal goes in, my buddy, and says something to Tommy and to Neil, and Neil comes out, he says, "Let's go to my house this afternoon." And I got to arrange, I put all the horn parts and string parts on Crackling Rosie, and it was the first #1 record for me that I had arranged.
Wow.
Great song.
And beautiful. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
I have pleasant memories hearing it as a teenager. I got a question for you. Like, I recently saw a clip of Brian Wilson with sitting down with George Martin, and they were talking about God Only Knows. And George Martin was really enamored with it. And Brian Wilson basically said that when Martin asked him about music, he said, "Where does it come from?" And Brian says it comes from a higher place in the mind, and then he said real music comes from the heart. What do you think about that?
I think he's absolutely right. And of all songs that you picked, there's a section of that in the middle where it goes bump, bump, bumpy, bump, ba-da-da-da-da-ba. Brian and I had like a fun argument over that. Actually, you can find this on YouTube, too. We were going back and forth, and I said, "Brian, let me play it short. Everybody should play that part short because you had it playing very flowing and pretty." And I talked him into it.
Wow.
And that's how it ended up on the record.
Wow.
The short version. What a great song. Oh, my
Fantastic
goodness.
song and very well written. So, where can we learn more about your music and your career and the whole Don Randi story?
Well, my book, You've Heard These Hands. I have many, many CDs. They're all available. Amazon does a great job for us. And Amoeba always stocks me, so that's kind of
Fantastic.
nice. And then I have them wherever we play, a lot of times at the Baked Potato. Incidentally, my son, Justin, is the hard rock Neil Diamond.
Oh, really? Wow.
Oh, yeah, he's got that voice. And
Great.
I talk him into doing Crackling Rose and a couple of the other Neil's tunes every once in a while.
Oh, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah,
Love to hear
it's
it.
fun. It is
and
fun.
Your Quest again.
Yes, yeah.
So, and then the most recent album is
It's
called
Acoustomania. We went into, not far from here, at Firehouse Recording Studios, and just John DePatty, who is a great guitar player, and myself did an acoustic album using their Bosendorf piano.
Wow.
And it's all original tunes on it, too.
And that was done in Pasadena?
In Pasadena, right over here.
Wow.
Great studio.
Wow. And this is the album right here.
Acoustomania.
And this is Niswander, and I'm here with Don Randi, and you've been watching The Nowman Show.
I tell him what my uncle told me. My uncle was a master sergeant in the Air Force. And he traveled around the world operating rod and gun clubs for the Air Force. And I told him I was going to be a professional musician. He said, well, I want to tell you, it's one of the hardest jobs in the world. So you're going to have to work your ass off. You're not going to make any money. You're not going to get any appreciation, which is 90% correct. And that's what I tell them, you know, is don't expect a #1 record. I mean, you may get it, but you may have to work 10 years, just like Bruce Hornsby. You know, he was an overnight sensation, but he was messing with that stuff for 8 or 9 years before he had that hit. And a lot of times that happened. And Glenn the same way. It's a rough business. Well, there's a period in my life when I was trying to write standards. A guy, a baritone player for Tower of Power, came up to me one day, Doc, I think his name is, and he said, Leon, how do you get all those people to cut your records? He said, I've had 12 #1 records. Nobody has ever cut any of them but Tower of Power. And I said, well, maybe your lick's too complicated. I don't know. I mean, standards, when you write standards, when you first hear a standard, it sounds just like a shitty little tune, you know. And then you come back and you hear it later, and then you hear it 20 years later. They're different. I was trying, when I wrote Masquerade, I was trying to write a standard. I wrote Song for You. I was trying to write a song that Ray Charles and Frank Sinatra could sing, a blues song that Ray Charles and Frank Sinatra could sing. 20 years ago, I don't know what the number is now, but 20 years ago, Song for You had been cut 129 times. I don't know, that was before Ray Charles cut it. Masquerade was cut 43 times before George Benson cut it. I mean, I try to write standards. I don't try to write hits. I liked Song for You. Herb Alpert had bought that grand from Western Studio 3. It was my favorite grand piano in Los Angeles. And Herb bought it. And when I played that, I'd never played it that way before. I'd never played that intro before. I just, all off the top of my head, I mean, which is the story of my life, really. And basically, I was trying to sing like Bonnie Bramlett. At that time, we was all trying to sing like Bonnie Bramlett. You know, I mean, she was a person that had a quite unusual singing style. And all the girls were copying it, and I was trying to sing it on that song. A limousine driver told me one time he's in New York, he was hauling Aretha Franklin, and he got to the destination and that song came on. She said she made him sit there and play that 20 times. She listened to it over and over again. It was kind of shitty singing. I really didn't have it figured out ever, but that was the first song that I did.
I've been so many places in my life and time. I've sung a lot of songs, I've made some bad rhymes. I've acted out my love in stages